Welcome back to Never Did It. I'm Jake Ziegler, and I'm here with Brad Garoon. On Never Did It, we look back at the last 100 years of movie history in an effort to fill in some of our own movie blind spots. Today, we're covering the year 1945, and we've got a couple of, I'd say, pretty known movies to cover from a couple of masters. We're going to talk about David Lean's Brief Encounter and Alfred Hitchcock's, Suspicion, Sabotage, Spellbound. These are so many movies that are one word with an S. I kept calling it different things. Like every time Megan's like, which movie is it we're watching? I had to go through like the whole list of movies. Like, wait, which one is it? I couldn't really. I kept going through the whole list. He has many of them this way. But yes, it'll be Spellbound and Brief Encounter. Let's start with Hitchcock. He's always a good place to start with. I recommended Spellbound for you. That was because again, when we're back in this kind of era, there's a kind of limited choice, not a whole lot that I've seen from this year. But so it's Hitchcock, Gregory, Peck, it's Ingrid, Bergman. It seemed like there would certainly be enough to talk about, and certainly easy to recommend a Hitchcock movie at any point in time. So tell me what you thought about this movie.
Well, okay. Before I talk about what I thought about it, I'm just going to really quick say what it is about. So yes. Ingmar Bergman is Ingrid, not the director. No right. relation, weirdly, which is so strange. Isabella Rossellini's mom is a doctor at a psychiatric facility. She's the only female doctor. The head of the psychiatric facility leaves, and a new head of the psychiatric facility joins. Or maybe he's not the head, but he's a new big shot is coming to the clinic. And he shows up, and immediately there's something very weird about him, not least of which is Gregory Peck is super tall. Yeah. He and kind of like a cardboard cutout. She goes for a day trip with him to get to know each other. It's the 40s, so they fall in love, of course. And then he is really acting very strangely, and it becomes very clear very quickly that he's not who he says he is. He might not even be who he thinks he is. It's a very interesting premise for a movie that feels so of its time, almost like it's locked in time. If you put out this movie in this way today, it would be mocked to high heaven. It would be so blasted. Just the way we think about psychology. This movie is all about analysis, about psychoanalysis, which is, for those of you who go to therapy, it's very likely that you are no longer being psychoanalyzed when you go to therapy. Behavioral psychology has sort of taken over. I remember when we went to college together. I remember when we were at Western Michigan University taking my psychology classes and learning about behavioral psychology and being curious about psychoanalysis because I watched movies which are obsessed with psychoanalysis and being taught that is not really the mode anymore. I mean, it happens. People are analyzed, but it was something that was really popular in the 20th century and is not popular anymore. If you watch Shrinking, none of these people are psychoanalyzing their patients. It's interesting. What it seems happened here was, or I read this and I don't know if this is true, but this was produced by David O. Selznick.
David O. Selznick, yeah.
Apparently, David O. Selznick was obsessed with psychoanalysis and really wanted a movie about it, and Hitchcock did that for him. There is so much psychobabble in this that sounds wrong and stupid. It's all about, it's not imposter syndrome, it's guilt what is it?
Complex.
Guilt complex, right. It heavily hinges on whether or not the main character is suffering from, Gregory Peck's character is suffering from a guilt complex. Did he kill the real head of the psychiatric department and take his place? And what I found so preposterous, first off, I should say it's Hitchcock, so there's a baseline. I liked it. Right? I enjoyed the movie, but it's far from my favorite Hitchcock because I could not get past Bergman's love for Peck, despite him being irritable, a jerk, really mean to her, and just not well. And she just forgives him and wants to take care of him. As the only professional woman in this setting, I was like, why are all the tropes that she just wants to be his mother wife?
Well, because it's Hitchcock. I mean, he's not known for his strong, treatment of female characters at all times.
That's true. I mean, he's also not known for his good treatment of women in real life, but he has some strong female well, it's funny I say that. He has some strong female characters, and I'm thinking of Psycho, but then at the end of Psycho, the female main character has to be explained what happened throughout the movie. I'm trying to think, or in The Birds, it's mostly women who are driving that movie, and that happens to be my least favorite Hitchcock movie, but not because of the characters as much as I just find it kind of boring. Like, birds are the enemy. I don't know. It's just not that interesting. Well, tell me, like, I know we do love Hitchcock. Where does this fall on your Hitchcock pantheon?
it's lesser Hitchcock. I definitely think I liked it more than you. I didn't bump up against just some of the elements of style from the time as much as I did. I mean, yes, it's completely ridiculous how in love with the Gregory Peck character that Ingrid Bergman is. But I think kind of as the movie went on, it went from a little bit less of her being in love with him to more that she just wanted to prove that he was innocent. Like she really believed that he didn't commit the crime. So I think they did shift it at least enough for me to kind of ignore how in love with him she was early on at a point where she definitely should not have been. So I kind of got past that, and I thought there was just like some really cool stylistic things in the movie, like just a couple of cool little shots, like when he's drinking the glass of he's drinking the glass of milk and he sees the white, because like white is a trigger color for him. So there's like that cool shot, and I was willing to go along with it. So like I liked that shot where he was drinking the glass of milk. I thought that was cool, and I thought there were some other like just really cool shots. I'm trying to think of what there was one other like really famous one in it.
Well, there's the whole dream sequence that was, I guess, produced by Salvador Dali. That was very cool and very different from what you get in most Hitchcock movies. I mean, Vertigo has some similar stuff, but a lot of Hitchcock movies are not from the warped perspective of his characters. They're pretty much based in reality. So that was neat, and I like that quite a bit, as Gregory Peck's character is trying to remember what actually happened on this fateful day when he and his doctor went for a walk and maybe he killed him. What did you think of the reveal? Spoiler alert, Gregory Peck is innocent. What did you think of the reveal?
Well, what he actually is feeling the guilt from was, I thought was like shockingly violent for 1945. Standard spoiler alert for all the movies we talk about. It's also, however many years old. But, he killed his brother. It was an accident. That was, I thought, so violent. He was impaled on a gate outside of their house. I was like, oh my God. Like, no wonder he has trauma, in his brain. That would have been awful.
That was quite a reveal. Quite a twist. We talked about the Virgin Suicides recently, and there's a death scene very similar in Virgin Suicides. But Virgin Suicides came out in the last 20 years, and this came out in 1945, and you do see him, from his own point of view, slide down a banister, knock his little brother on top of a metal fence. You don't see the gore, of course, but it gets you right up until that last moment. It is very shocking. No, I meant the reveal of who actually murdered the would-be head of the psychiatric department.
Remind me who it was.
It was didn't you just watch this? So this is my problem. Wait, I'm glad you said that, because when you started bringing up the fact that he killed his little brother, I also just watched this like a couple days ago, and I'd forgotten that happened. So it immediately came back to me. But just now, I'm glad that you forgot that one of her colleagues who was going to take the place of Gregory Peck's character actually did it. What was that guy's plan? I don't understand. Like, did he know that this patient was going to have a guilt complex and take the blame, or show up and pretend to be the guy? Like, I just don't understand what his plan was. Was he just hoping that the guy would never show up? Maybe that was his plan.
I think, it was like the guy showing up was not part of the plan, and that was all just happenstance. And his end was a little bit, I was a little bit shocked by his end, too. I mean, and when I had said, that I had seen this movie, this is another one I'd probably seen back when I was in college or high school or whatever. So, I mean, it had been forever since I'd seen this, so I really didn't remember much of it. But then, when he meets his end and, turns the gun on himself, and I thought that was another cool shot, too, the way Hitchcock shot that. I was a little surprised at that, too. I was like, gosh, movie's really, this was kind of violent for 1945. Not the strongest reveal of any Hitchcock movie. It was a little bit of a not the greatest of all of his reveals.
Right. It was the guy who stood to benefit the most. What a shot.
Yes. the bad guy was the bad guy.
Yeah. My problem actually in this is that he wasn't the bad guy, and that we barely saw him at all. He's just like in the beginning, and then when she comes in after their first romantic walk to the boys' club at dinner. I love how all these guys work together and eat dinner together. And she's got her hair messed up, which is obviously a euphemism. He makes some smarmy remarks, but that's kind of it. What you just said about being like surprised about how violent this movie is, and it's incredibly tame by today's standards. But
for sure.
I know you mentioned in your brief encounter review that you thought that the plot was kind of scandalous for 1945. I have this feeling that since these are English movies, they're able to get away with more. Movies being produced and released in Britain and then come over to the United States, but they're English movies with European actors. I would say English actors, but Ingrid Bergman is not an English actress. I mean, we know, like when we watch old French films and old Italian films, there's way more sex in those movies than in American movies. So it was certainly true, or at least somewhat true in England as well. The last thing I want to talk about, because the thing that kept this from being Bird's level for me and being somewhere more in like Sabotage level for me, or maybe not Sabotage, maybe like more like To Catch a Thief level, was the Ingrid Bergman's mentor, played by Michael Chekhov, who is the nephew of, or maybe it's Mikhail Chekhov is his name, not Michael. That would make more sense. Who is the nephew of the eponymous Chekhov of Chekhov's gun fame. His character's great. He's like really fun. He deduces everything that's going on immediately. He tricks Gregory Peck when Gregory Peck is having one of his I saw 3 lines in a row and had a mental breakdown episodes. Like anything with parallel lines is going to make me go crazy because I went skiing once and the fence and all that stuff. Anyway, that character is amazing. I just wanted to shout him out because I don't think he had the biggest film career. I think most of his family was on stage. Also, just small fun fact for the Jews out there, Mikhail Chekhov was Jewish, but the rest of the famous Chekhovs were not.
I like that.
Shall we move over to Brief Encounter?
Yes. Let's talk about Brief Encounter. First, before we talk about what it's about, tell me why you recommended it.
Yeah, so it's David Lean. You know, David Lean, clearly a blind spot for you. We did Lawrence of Arabia, which is wild because, as you mentioned earlier, he's one of the, all-time greats. This is probably his second most famous movie. It's the winner of, or one of the many winners of the first Palme d'Or. It wasn't called the Palme d'Or then, but it won what became the Palme d'Or at the first Cannes Film Festival, nominated for a few Oscars, which, British movie. And, it's heavily iterated on now. Like, basically any movie about a tryst has little things from Brief Encounter. Plus, it's David Lean, so it looks really cool. And it's based on a pretty interesting play. And I wanted to also talk about adaptations of plays because it's based on a one act and it does some really interesting things in expanding the story from a one act stage play to a movie, even though the story's not huge. And I when I watched it, I remember being kind of bored by it. So I wanted to watch it again because it is in the Letterboxd 250. It's, I think, considered by the BFI the second greatest British film ever made. I was like, well, I'm probably underrating it. And I was underrating it. So it was a good opportunity for me to check it out again and reassess it. So real quick, it's about a woman who is, I wouldn't say like brutally unhappy in her marriage, but kind of bored. She goes to a different town once a week to see a movie, which is great. Who can't relate to that? And when she's doing that, she meets a doctor at a train station and they strike up a friendship, which turns into an emotional affair and has the potential to turn into more than an emotional affair. And that's what the movie is about. What'd you think of A Brief Encounter or Brief Encounter?
Yeah, I loved this movie. I thought it was really beautiful, beautifully told and just beautifully acted by the both of them. And I thought this, stylistically, the way it was told with the narration, Celia Johnson really handles the whole movie, really, the way she narrates it and tells the story about how it happened. And the way she's doing it is in like a confession to her husband, basically, which I thought was a really interesting way to do it, and a way to kind of tell that story, the progression of it. And like you said earlier when we were talking about Spellbound, you're like, well, because it's the 40s, they fall in love. And while, like that was, it felt like more of a convention of that movie. In this movie, it really feels earned, the way they spend their time together. It starts off small, like they just happen, you said they met in the train station. Well, the way they met is because she had a piece of grit in her eye or something and she needed a doctor. He happened to be there and he was able to get that piece of grit out of her eye for her, like just a chance little meeting. And then, they happened to, there was not a table available at the restaurant that they were both at. So they was like, oh, well, let's share this table together. And it just kind of proceeds from there. It really feels a lot more believable. And the connection that they have feels a lot more believable. And it's just a really interesting movie. And of course, like I said, since it's lean, it's shot very well in the black and white, the way they film the shadows and things, especially when they're going in the train stations, when they're going through like the back alleys and the train stations, everything looks really cool. I really liked this movie a lot. And I was surprised when I saw your review that you had rated it low. I mean, low compared to, like I said, what I would have expected just with the reputation that, that you've already talked about. I'm glad that you watched it again.
What I really love about it is there's so much tension, not in the fact that they're having an affair, but where will the affair go? They admit to themselves pretty much immediately that they're being inappropriately close with one another, and it's not physical, but they're spending too much time with each other and they're too reliant on each other, and just the fact that they love each other is a problem. It's also interesting because we never see the doctor. He's played by Trevor Howard. One thing that's a little bit of a bummer is it was originally supposed to be Richard Livesey, who was the star of The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, but Lean wanted Howard, so that's what we got. And Howard does a good job. He's quite good, but he's not the focal point of the movie as much as Celia Johnson is. He has to do a lot less of the heavy lifting. We do see Celia Johnson's husband. We spend time with her when she's not with him. We never spend time with him when he's not with her. The whole movie's from her point of view. And what I thought the resolution of the conflict was interesting too. So they do eventually decide to sleep with each other, both there and another time before this happens. They're interrupted by people who they know, and they're just so ashamed of what they're doing. The doctor's friend who owned the apartment where they were going to shtup lays on the major guilt trip. Eventually, the movie makes it pretty explicit that they never sleep together. And then he makes this decision to go to South Africa, which is another very interesting artifact of the time. I don't think you'd have a lot of British folks being like, oh, my brother still lives in South Africa. The one-act play that it's based on is very ambiguous about whether or not they sleep together. And in the movie, It's not ambiguous. Yeah. So it's a totally different story, really. The other thing that I think is interesting about differences between the play and the movie, there's this great thing happening in the movie, which was the reason why I was so glad that I watched it again, because I kind of glossed over it the first time I watched it. There's all these little side characters in the little cafe where they meet each other that are having their own movie.
Amazing. Yeah.
And it sort of parallels what's happening in this relationship, but they don't even pay attention to what is happening to the two main characters. It's really great. It reminds me a lot of other great movies we've talked about recently, like The Searchers and Make Way for Tomorrow, where you have these little other stories going on that they're tangentially related to the story, but you could take them out of the movie, but the movie's so much richer for them being in it. And this is another one. In the play, the characters are remarking on the affair as it happens. In the movie, obviously, they don't. They're much more concerned with their own comic relief stuff going on.
Well, yeah, I love the police officer and the woman who works behind the counter at the cafe, snack bar, whatever that is, and the relationship that they have, because they kind of have a different thing where their relationship is not inappropriate in any way, but they can't really do anything in public because you're like, oh, well, I'm at work, we can't show any of this affection right now. So they're like, it's kind of the same thing where like they can't show any of this affection, but it's for an entirely different reason, and it's a lot funnier than in an entirely different way where where the main characters, it's a lot sadder. It's like, yeah, I mean, they're doing something that's wrong and inappropriate, and they recognize it, but they're, I don't know, like you don't feel like they're bad people or anything. So there's certainly some amount of sympathy and empathy that you have for these characters for sure. And like you mentioned, we do see some time here with her husband at home, and yeah, he's not a bad guy either. I mean, yeah, she's just a little bored. He likes to sit around and do his crossword puzzles, and that seems to be all about that's all pretty much all he does. And the doctor's just a little more interesting, a little more exciting and new, and that's kind of all there is to it. He's not it's not like she's having a bad time at home either. He's just home with crossword puzzle guy.
We're going to talk about in a couple of weeks the movie Diner, and I mentioned that this movie is very influential, and I don't know if they knowingly pulled this in Diner. I don't know if Barry Levinson thought about this when he was making this movie. Diner is a very improvised movie, but there's a married couple in Diner, and the husband is really into music and the wife doesn't care about it so much, and it causes a huge rift in their relationship. And that's exactly what is happening in Brief Encounter, where she loves music and he just wants to, beat his friends in the crossword. That's me projecting. I always want to beat my friends' times in the New York crossword puzzle. But it's funny how people sharing interests in films about music specifically, because people become so obsessed with it. The movie High Fidelity, very similar, where if you can't keep up with his voracious music knowledge, you're not going to jive for him. And that's going to be very annoying for your partner. And it's interesting because it's 1945. The man is not annoyed with his wife. The wife is very annoyed with her husband. Not annoyed. Sorry, I take that back. The wife would love for someone to stimulate her emotionally and intellectually and physically, unlike her husband. And it doesn't happen. So I like that we see, I mean, maybe it's just a common experience that people have, of course, like you want to have things in common with your spouse. But I did like that we watched Diner and Brief Encounter so close to each other, and there's a similarity. We'll talk about it maybe a little bit more when we have our guest on to talk about Diner.
I definitely noticed that too, because I watched them so close together, and even the resolution is somewhat similar too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually almost the same. Very, wow, cool. So there were Oscar nominations for Brief Encounter.
For both of these movies, actually. Even though we're covering these movies for 1945, they actually competed in different years, because Brief Encounter came out in the States in 46. So let's look at, Spellbound first in 1945 was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Chekhov, Best Cinematography, Black and White, Best Special Effects, and then the only one that it won was for Best Music, scoring of a dramatic or comedy picture. And I thought that was cool. I thought the score was really, really good.
I thought the score was insane. And now, granted, the score being insane was for sure on purpose, but I felt like I was watching an alien invasion movie because every time he starts to go crazy, you hear like the theremin playing, like the.
You did that pretty good.
Oh, thank you. I was like, why is that the music? It does fit, but it makes me think that Hitchcock's never seen a B movie, so he didn't know that like we might have that association with it. Sci-fi was not yet the center of culture.
Right. But yeah, won that one, and then 1, 2, 3, 5. So 1 for 6 for Spellbound, and then the following year, Brief Encounter then was oddly not nominated for Best Picture, but it was nominated. David Lean was nominated for Best Director. He lost to William Wyler for The Best Years of Our Lives, which was a huge movie that year. Celia Johnson was nominated for Best Actress, and she lost to Olivia de Havilland for a movie called To Each His Own. Not familiar with that movie. And then it was also up for Best Adapted Screenplay, which it also lost to The Best Years of Our Lives, the Best Picture winner. So, went 0 for 3, but still top, those were top categories it was nominated in. So pretty good showing. Yeah.
It wasn't a big hit when it came out. It did okay, but it wasn't a huge success. So I'm not surprised it didn't get nominated for Best Picture. I think history has obviously judged it much more kindly than people at the time. But yeah, not a big hit. Although now the movies that get nominated for Best Picture, no one has seen. So
right. So do you have top lists of these, or do you have like a top of the decade or anything? Because I don't have a list for 1945 or 46, but I have a top of the 40s.
I do have a decade list. Let's take a look at where this falls. I'll also just real quick, the two lists I want to just sort of put in context. Do you want to go first with your 1940s list?
Yeah, I'll just mention. I mean, Spellbound didn't make my list. It's not in the top 20 at all. Right now, I have Brief Encounter at number 17 in my list, but after talking about it a little bit, I feel like I might have underrated it, as that sometimes happens. But there's also, some outstanding movies in the 40s. You've got your Citizen Kane, Casablanca, Treasure Sierra Madre. I mentioned The Best Years of Our Lives. We'll cover that later. That's a great movie. Maltese Falcon, His Girl Friday, Great Dictator, Pinocchio, Colonel Blimp. Just so many great movies of the 40s. So, a lot of good competition there.
So I've got Spellbound at number 26 because I go up to 100 for my decade lists. And I had Brief Encounter at 21, but after rewatching it, it moved up to number 10.
Oh, nice. That's quite a jump.
Yeah, quite a jump. And then, there's a lot of, it's funny, a lot of this list is made up of Hitchcock movies. But if I look at my Alfred Hitchcock rankings, I've seen 16 Alfred Hitchcock movies. Spellbound comes in at number 14. The only ones I have beneath it are The Birds at number 16 and the original version of The Man Who Knew Too Much at number 15. The remake of Man Who Knew Too Much is number 11. All right, cool. We'll be back next week. I have realized that these are all coming in out of order. I think next week we'll do, Sofia Coppola, will be next week, your Sofia Coppola rankings. And then after that, we'll be back with 1982 to talk about Diner.